There comes a moment, silent, unscripted, when all the scattered pieces begin to speak to one another. It is not logic that unifies them, nor argument that arranges them. It is a deeper gravity, a sacred pull from the center of the soul. The seeker, after countless spirals of inquiry, no longer pursues answers in isolation. The questions themselves begin to harmonize. And suddenly, everything, the angels, the atoms, the ancient myths, the shadows of the psyche, the dreams of the future, the memory of the stars, begins to point inward. Not as destination, but as origin. This book is not a ladder. It is a mirror, a doorway, a song half remembered from another time. It is not here to teach you something new, but to help you remember what you already knew before forgetting became survival. You have not been asleep out of laziness. You have been anesthetized by noise, blurred by centuries of repetition, conditioned by the spell of time. And yet, in the quietest moments, between one breath and another, something ancient within you stirs. A voice not heard with ears, a memory not stored in the brain, a pulse magnetic and subtle, calling you back through layers of illusion. You were taught to believe that time is a river flowing forward, that the past is behind you like a crumbling shore, and that the future waits somewhere ahead like a fog-covered bridge. You were told that the present is all you can hold, a fleeting sliver between what has vanished and what has not yet arrived. But what if this model, so rigid and linear, is a distortion? What if time is not a line, but a spiral, or more precisely, a field, alive, sentient and responsive to thought? What if the aching you feel at midnight, the longing you cannot name, is not disorder, but disorientation in a dimension your senses were never trained to navigate? What if time is not something you pass through, but something that responds to you? What if your thoughts are not echoes within your mind, but signals that ripple backward and forward across timelines, altering the very nature of what you call the past, and conjuring into form what you believe to be the future? Perhaps the pain that revisits you is not just memory, but a vibration you left behind, still waiting to be unmade. Perhaps what you name regret is simply a thread still attached, calling for reconciliation. And what if the solution to what you carry now already exists, not somewhere ahead, but parallel, folded within another dimension of yourself? There's a form of seeing that does not come through the eyes. There's a form of knowing that does not arrive through proof. To enter it, you must listen from the center, not the ears, not the mind, but that undisturbed place within you where all timelines converge. Some have called it intuition. Others have called it divine guidance, the adjuster of thought, the breath of God within the mortal psyche. It does not shout. It does not argue. It whispers in symbols, in sensations, in a stillness that feels alive. And though religions and doctrines have often distorted it, the mystics and poets, those rare cartographers of the soul, never forgot. Khalil Gibran heard it in the wind. Jung glimpsed it in dreams. Gurdjieff trained the body to obey it. And Jesus, not the one sculpted by institutions, but the luminous being who walked through dimensions as easily as cities, became its living bridge. This voice, this internal compass, is not new. It has always been with you. But to hear it again, you must dismantle the illusion that your mind is the master. You must unlearn the alphabet of fear and remember the original language. The one spoken in symbols before the birth of grammar, the one encoded in your breath before you had a name. And when you begin to think in 4 dimensions, this voice grows clearer. Not because it speaks louder, but because you grow quieter. Not because it changes, but because you return. What you call awakening is not an ascent. It is a re-entry into the inner cathedral you once abandoned. To think in 4 dimensions is not to escape the present. but to sanctify it. It is to understand that the now is not a flicker between two voids, but a nexus where memory, possibility, and divinity braid themselves into form. The ancients whispered this truth beneath stone altars and desert stars. Modern science, still fumbling with equations, is beginning to feel the tremor of its approach. But your soul, the soul that has crossed lifetimes, that has spoken in symbols, that has died and remembered and been born again, already knows. And it is tired of waiting for permission. It is tired of pretending to be smaller than the light it carries. You're not a body that happens to have a soul. You are a soul that has momentarily chosen to inhabit a body, not as punishment, not by accident, but as a luminous act of exploration. You came here not to conquer matter, but to remind it of its origin, to infuse time with eternity, to scatter the fragrance of the infinite across the fabric of the finite. And yet, somewhere along the path, you forgot. Not because you failed, but because forgetting was part of the journey. You agreed to the veil so that the unveiling could mean something. You chose the illusion so that the remembering would feel like fire. This is not a book of answers. This is a field of remembrance. It will not teach you how to transcend. It will remind you that you already have. Each page is a doorway. Each word, a mirror. The voice that guided you here is not mine. It is yours, older than time, softer than thought, insistent in the silence. And now that you've found it again, it will not let you go. Because this is the hour of return. And the return is not to a place, but to a frequency. A way of thinking that collapses the illusion of separation and reawakens the creator within. You are not here to wait. You are here to remember. And in remembering, to become whole. Chapter 1. The illusion that feels real. There's a kind of prison that builds no walls, no bars, no locks, only mirrors. It does not announce itself with chains, but with familiar routines. You wake up, walk through the day, respond to the world, and sleep again. The surface reflects normalcy, but beneath it something flickers. A quiet dissonance, a subtle doubt that whispers, "Is this all there is?" And though you carry on, there's a part of you, small at first, then impossible to ignore, that begins to see cracks in the pattern. Something doesn't fit. The world around you, so tangible, begins to feel like a stage. You touch it, you name it, you live in it, but something in your bones no longer believes it is real. This is not madness. It is the first tremor of awakening. For what you call the world is not the world. It is a projection, not of light upon a screen, but of perception upon your consciousness. Since birth, you were taught to believe that what you see is what is. But perception is not passive. It is not a camera recording what exists. It is a sculptor, constantly shaping, filtering, editing, constructing reality from fragments. What if the sky you admire, the hands you hold, the objects you fear are not things in themselves, but interpretations? What if the real world is not out there, but hidden behind the interpretations themselves? Plato knew this when he spoke of shadows on the cave wall. The figures you follow are not the source, they are echoes. The truth stands behind you, waiting for you to turn around. The illusion, however, is persistent because it feels real. And it feels real because you are trained to trust the senses more than the soul. But senses are deceived with ease. A slight change in light and the shape shifts. A trick of perspective and depth collapses. You mistake movement for meaning, repetition for truth. And slowly, without noticing, you begin to worship appearances. You give power to the external, and in doing so, forget the internal. Like marionettes pulled by invisible strings, you respond to patterns you didn't choose. You chase pleasures that fade the moment they arrive. You fear losses that have not yet occurred. You live not from essence, but from reaction. And yet, all along, there is something behind the curtain, something within the mist, waiting. You begin to suspect that the world was not built to deceive you, but that your perception was conditioned to keep you from seeing too much. Not because there is a conspiracy outside, but because there is fear within. The fear of what might be found if the veil is pulled back. The fear that the identity you've crafted, the one who wakes up, performs, earns, survives, may not be real. And yet, this fear is not your enemy. It is the friction that ignites the flame. It is the first resistance of the cocoon before the wings emerge. The illusion becomes unbearable not to punish you, but to invite you. The ache of repetition is not a failure. It is the soul's way of knocking louder. The ancient sages called it Maya, not illusion as in falseness, but illusion as in misperception. The world exists, yes, but not as you believe it does. What you touch is real, but the story you've wrapped around it is not. You live in narratives passed down like heirlooms, not knowing you could rewrite them. You believe in beginnings and endings because the clock taught you to. You measure your worth in minutes, your value in roles, your safety in repetition. But clocks do not measure time, they only slice it. And repetition is not safety, it is sedation. You are not born to fit into a cycle. You were born to awaken within it. Donald Hoffman argues that our senses evolved not to show us the truth, but to ensure our survival. What we see is not reality, it is interface. A filtered simulation designed to keep the organism functioning, not enlightened. Alan Watts echoes this with his playful gravity. The more we try to control life, the more it slips through our fingers. Control is the ultimate illusion, a theater of ego, masking our inability to surrender. And so we cling to routines, to definitions, to shadows on the wall, calling them truth. But deep down we know the puppet strings are not ours. We know the light is coming from behind us. We know there is something more. The Hermetic axiom whispers from the margins of ancient texts. All is mind. Not metaphor, not poetry, law. The universe is not made of things, but of thought. Form is the echo of intention. Matter, the slowed vibration of consciousness. The world you walk through is not solid. It is agreed upon. A shared hallucination maintained by collective belief. A hologram constructed by memory, expectation, and inherited fear. You think you live in a reality, but in truth, you live in a spell. And you are both the caster and the cast. And yet, this is not cause for despair. It is cause for awe. Because if perception is the architect of your prison, it can also be the blueprint of your liberation. You are not condemned to remain in the cave. You can turn. You can face the light, but not by force, by attention, by presence, by questioning the unquestioned. The shadows begin to dissolve the moment you stop chasing them. The hologram begins to glitch the moment you look through it, not at it. The veil, though thick, is made of thought, and thought can be transmuted. Not rejected, not silenced, but reoriented toward truth. It begins by noticing the repetition, the patterns that loop without purpose, the roles that feel worn and hollow, the beliefs that no longer nourish. These are not failures. They are signs, signals, invitations. The illusion persists until it is no longer needed, and then it collapses quietly like mist burned by morning light. And beneath it, what remains is not another fantasy, but a presence, a stillness so alive it trembles, a clarity so ancient it feels new. That is where the next path begins, where perception ceases to be a veil and becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, you no longer see shadows. You see yourself for the first time awake. Chapter 2. You are not your past. Memory is not a vault. It is a vibration. It does not store events like polished stones inside a box, untouched and unchanged. It ripples. It responds. It reshapes itself each time you return to it. And yet, we live as though the past were carved in stone. We build our identities around stories we never wrote, around wounds we never questioned, around roles we never consciously chose. You say, I am this way because of what happened. But what if that is not truth, only habit? What if the past is not a chain, but a pattern waiting to be rethreaded? What if who you are is not the echo of what was, but the emergence of what is continually, fluidly right now? There's a deeper truth hidden behind the chronology you were taught. Time is not linear, and neither are you. You're not a product of events. You're a field of frequencies, shaped less by what occurred and more by how you've learned to carry it. The traumas that haunt you are not frozen moments. They are unresolved energies still vibrating within your emotional body. Gabor Mate speaks of this with radical tenderness. Trauma is not what happened to you, but what happened inside you as a result. It is the rupture of connection, the silencing of truth, the severing of presence. But presence, once reawakened, can rewrite the field. The wound is not the final word, it is the doorway. Carl Jung knew this when he wrote of the child within, not the childish self, but the original one, the radiant fragment untouched by shame, the keeper of the dream before it was fractured. Beneath the defenses you've built, beneath the names you've worn, there is still a living ember of that first flame. It calls to you not with drama, but with stillness. And yet, we mistake healing for forgetting. We try to bury the past instead of tending to it. But what is buried still breathes. The version of you who cried alone, who is unseen, who was broken, she is not gone. She is waiting, not for pity, for integration, for remembrance without reattachment. For you, the past is not behind you. It is within you, nested in your cells, woven into your breath, humming beneath your thoughts like a half-remembered melody. But is not fixed, is not fossilized. Time, as the Urantia revelation reminds us, is not a prison but a tool, a field given to consciousness so that growth may unfold gradually, rhythmically, meaningfully. The adjuster of thought, that fragment of the divine nestled deep within the human psyche, works not only in the direction of becoming, but also in the direction of remembering. It whispers not only of your future potential, but of your ancient wholeness. And when you learn to listen beyond language, you begin to hear something astonishing. Your past can be healed not by changing it, but by changing how you vibrate in relation to it. Quantum physics hints at this strange grace, the idea that particles once entangled remain connected across space and time. What if your former selves are not memories, but entangled fragments of your ongoing field? What if, by healing now, you send a wave of resonance back into those frozen moments, softening their density, loosening their grip? The past is not somewhere else. It is here, echoing in your reactions, concealed in your defenses, encoded in your nervous system. But the field is alive. It listens. It responds. When you choose presence, when you breathe into the place that once held pain, you are not merely coping. You are collapsing a timeline, ending a loop, rethreading the soul's pattern. To say you're not your past is not to deny what happened. It is to refuse the false inheritance of identity through pain. You are not the event. You are not the wound. You are not the conclusion drawn in the dark. You are the awareness that remains, the one who sees, who feels, who chooses. The past may have shaped your form, but it does not dictate your essence. Essence is not sculpted by events. It is revealed through the undoing of what no longer serves. And so, Healing is not an act of resistance, but of recognition. Not a war against what was, but a reconciliation with what is. You were never meant to become your scars. You were meant to become the one who carries them with grace, then lays them down when the time is right. To reclaim yourself from the past is not to erase history, but to return to authorship. You are not born to play the role of victim in a script someone else wrote. You were born to awaken in the middle of the scene, to recognize the illusion, and to rewrite the ending. Healing is not passive, it is participatory. It requires that you enter the archive not as a prisoner, but as a creator, that you return to the moments where you fractured, not to relive them, but to re-embody them with the presence that was missing. This is not a metaphor. This is energetic fact. Your nervous system speaks the language of vibration. Your emotions remember frequencies more vividly than facts. And so you must meet your memory not with logic, but with love. The old versions of you are still waiting, not to be rescued, but to be seen. The one who froze when no one listened. The one who screamed in silence. The one who disappeared in order to be acceptable. They are not relics to be forgotten. They are sacred echoes to be retrieved. And the miracle is this: you can hold them now. You can enter the past from the present with a presence strong enough to transmute what once overwhelmed you. This is the essence of retroactive healing. Not denial, but reentry. Not repression, but revelation. You touch the pain not to bleed again, but to lift it into a new field, one that is saturated with consciousness, with compassion, with truth. You're not a sequence of traumas stitched together by survival. You are a vast, intelligent field, responsive, fluid, alive. You are not behind in your healing. You're exactly where the unraveling begins. And if the past still pulls at you, it is because a part of you knows that something sacred was left there, something buried beneath the grief, beneath the forgetting, beneath the mask. That something is not lost. It is waiting for the one who is ready to return, not as a child, but as a soul. And when you return with presence, the past is not your weight. It becomes your teacher. Time then becomes not a chain, but a compass. And what once felt like repetition now reveals itself as a spiral, not circling back, but rising higher and higher toward the remembrance of what was never broken. Chapter 3, Four-Dimensional Thinking. We have been taught to see time as a ruler, long, cold, unbending, a line stretching from a forgotten past toward a future that never quite arrives. This model has ruled the imagination for centuries. It shapes our calendars, our ambitions, our regrets. We speak of what was and what will be as if they are distant lands, unreachable except through memory or anticipation. But what if this line was never true? What if it is not time that is rigid, but the lens through which we view it? The soul does not think in sequence. It thinks in resonance. And the moment you begin to sense this, the moment you feel the tight grip of linearity loosen in your chest, something opens. Not forward, not backward, but inward into the field. Time, in its essence, is not a measure. It is a presence. It does not move but holds. It does not end but curves. In the teachings whispered through indigenous wisdom, time is not a march, but a circle, not a cage, but a spiral that breathes. The Mayans mapped it in glyphs. The Andean mystics walked it in ceremony. They knew what modern physics is just beginning to glimpse, that the past and future are not fixed locations, but vibrating thresholds within a single unfolding continuum. And within this continuum lives what we call now. Not a fleeting second between birth and death, but a living portal into all dimensions at once. The now is not small. It is vast. It is the place where all realities touch. To think in four dimensions is not to become prophetic. It is to become present beyond the senses. It is not a gift reserved for mystics. It is the birthright of every being who chooses to awaken. Greg Braden speaks of time as fractal, self-repeating, holographic, where patterns echo through cycles both grand and minute. You are not separate from these cycles. You are the rhythm becoming conscious of itself. The dreams you carry are not random. They are coordinates. They point not to what you must chase, but to what already exists in a parallel field of you. The version of you who remembers, who lives from intuition, who acts without fear. She is already alive, already pulsing in this now. Four-dimensional thinking is how you meet her. The world has conditioned you to believe in the tyranny of sequence. That first must come the effort, then the reward. First the wound, then the healing. First the loss, then the restoration. But in the deeper realm of consciousness, this order dissolves. The soul does not wait. It remembers. It reaches forward and backward simultaneously, weaving together what the mind believes to be separate. When you begin to think in four dimensions, you discover that healing can precede understanding, and that understanding can reach into your future and rearrange what you thought was already decided. You begin to feel that time is not a hallway, but a living organism, breathing with your awareness, bending at the touch of your intention. The Urantia revelation reminds us that time and space are scaffolding for the evolution of personality, a temporary stage for the performance of eternal meanings. You are not trapped in time. You are learning to shape it. The adjuster of thought, that fragment of divine presence placed within you, uses time not to punish, but to refine. It speaks through synchronicity. It arranges meetings that appear as chance, but are encoded with design. It places memories in your path not as burdens, but as mirrors through which you might glimpse your own becoming. To live in awareness of this is to step outside the rigidity of linear progression and into the realm of simultaneity, where the sacred now becomes an altar and the altar becomes a portal. In the Hermetic tradition, the law of correspondence declares, as above, so below, as within, so without. This is not poetry, it is structure. Reality is layered, mirrored, recursive. Every moment contains within it the seeds of all others. Every thought is a doorway. Every emotion a signal. The universe is not outside of you. It is enfolded within you, waiting to be unfolded through consciousness. When you begin to think this way, not only does time shift, meaning deepens. You stop asking when and start asking where am I in the frequency of what I seek. You stop waiting for signs and begin noticing that they've always been there. You were simply looking with linear eyes. But now your vision is bending. To see the present not as a fleeting sliver between what was and what might be, but as a living convergence of all timelines, is to begin to walk in remembrance. You are not merely a participant in time, but a participant in reality's unfolding intelligence. The now is not a passage. It is a convergence point where soul, body, and intention align into coherence. It is here that your thoughts ripple outward into the field, shaping outcomes before they arrive. It is here that echoes from a future begin to whisper, not as fantasy, but as frequency. And it is here that your past begins to soften, no longer as a weight to carry, but as an energy to transmute. The now is not passive. It is alchemical. You may find yourself returning again and again to old patterns, but with new eyes. This is not regression. It is deepening. Time does not spiral backward. It spirals inward. And with each return, something ancient within you recognizes the terrain with more clarity. You feel it in moments of déjà vu, in the synchronistic meeting, in the quiet pause between one breath and another. These are not interruptions of reality. They are reality, briefly revealing itself through the seams of illusion. To think in 4 dimensions is not to abandon logic, but to transcend the tyranny of its linearity. It is to let the intellect kneel before the soul, and to let awareness stretch across dimensions like light through crystal. The present moment, once feared for its stillness, now becomes sacred. You enter it not to escape, but to arrive. You bring to it the full awareness of what has been and what could be, and yet you rest within it without urgency. This is not detachment, it is devotion. The now becomes your altar, the place where your thoughts are offerings, your breath is incense, and your choices are rituals of remembrance. And the altar becomes your portal, the threshold through which you travel without moving, heal without touching, create without striving. You're no longer a seeker of time's gifts. You are the one who remembers how to unwrap the eternal from within the temporary. You are the one who remembers how to listen where the world only knows how to wait. Chapter 4. The Mind as a Sacred Instrument. There is a silence more powerful than thought. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of listening. A silence not empty, but alive, vibrating just beneath the surface of perception like a subtle current beneath a still lake. It is from this place that the mind, once unruly and loud, begins to remember its true function. Not to control, not to calculate, not to categorize, but to commune. The mind was never meant to dominate the soul. It was meant to serve as its translator, its amplifier, its sacred tuning fork. When quieted and aligned, it does not vanish. It becomes luminous. It becomes precise. It becomes a bridge. You have been told that thoughts are fleeting, that they come and go like clouds. But this is only half true. Thoughts are frequencies, and frequencies carry form. The mind does not merely reflect reality. It projects it. Each thought is not just a response to the world, but a signal that weaves itself into the world. You do not simply observe, you participate. You are not an echo. You are a frequency generator, pulsing waves into the field with every intention, every belief, every mental gesture. Joe Dispenza speaks of this with clarity, that the mind, when fused with emotion, becomes the engine of manifestation. And yet this is not magic. It is law. It is the rhythm by which spirit becomes visible. But most minds are not instruments. They are noise machines, buzzing with inherited beliefs, tangled in narratives, addicted to control. They fire not from clarity, but from compulsion. They do not create, they repeat. To transform the mind into a sacred tool is not to sharpen it, but to still it. Not to strengthen it, but to align it. Tully reminds us that observation is the beginning of liberation. That the moment you witness your thought, you're no longer trapped inside it. You have stepped onto the threshold of awareness. The watcher is not neutral. The watcher is divine. In the space between thought and identification, eternity enters. And in that space, the mind begins to glow with its original light. The light that knows how to shape, how to listen, how to become. Intention is not a wish. It is a signature, an energetic declaration that resonates beyond thought, beyond speech, into the subtle structures of reality itself. To intend is not merely to want, but to align, to gather the fragmented forces of the self and point them in a single direction, like light through a lens becoming fire. Thought alone is static, but thought fused with presence becomes directive, shaping the invisible into form. Every inner decision, whether conscious or not, is a brushstroke on the canvas of the field. And so the question is not whether you are creating, but what you are creating and from where. In the wisdom of the theosophical teachings, the mind is not one, it is layered. The lower manas, the reactive conditioned mind, is bound to form, shaped by sensory experience and the pull of the material. But above it lives the higher manas, the discerning, silent mind that perceives not through logic, but through resonance. It is this higher mind that remembers. It does not grasp, it receives. It does not judge, it recognizes. And when it awakens, the lower mind no longer resists, it surrenders. This is not a loss of identity, but a return to sacred function. The instrument does not lose itself in the music. It becomes the means through which the music is heard. Rumi once wrote that the soul has an ear that listens beyond the world. That ear is not located in the body. It is in the still mind, the mind that listens without interference, that opens not to noise, but to presence. In this stillness, the soul hears the whisper of dimensions beyond the reach of thought. It hears the pulse of the unseen, the breath of the eternal, the symphony beneath form. And in listening, it begins to echo. The mind becomes a chamber, a sanctuary. It no longer shouts. It rings. It no longer commands. It responds. And in that response, intention becomes not a demand upon the world, but a communion with it. To think is not to depart from the divine. It is to extend it, but only when thought is anchored in presence, refined by silence, and born not from fear, but from essence. The ordinary mind rushes to fill the space with conclusions, as if the unknown were a threat. But the sacred mind bows to the unknown as teacher. It does not hurry to resolve mystery. It enters it. It lets questions remain open long enough for truth to echo. And in that patience, a different kind of knowing arises. Not the knowing that defines, but the one that unveils. This knowing cannot be summoned through effort. It arrives when the channel is clear. The world teaches that silence is absence. But in the deeper traditions, silence is presence amplified. It is the hum beneath thought, the sky beneath weather. You begin to sense that the mind, once quieted, is not empty. It is porous. Through it flow impressions from the soul, intuitions from dimensions unseen, blueprints from fields beyond comprehension. You do not need to force them. You need only to become receptive. This is not a passive state. It is a luminous attention. You sit in the stillness not to escape the world, but to hear it from the inside. You think not to control reality, but to participate in its emergence with reverence. You intend not to manipulate outcomes, but to offer resonance to the unfolding. When a mind is made sacred again, reality shifts. Not because the world has changed, but because your participation has become coherent. The silent mind is not dull. It is listening. It hears the movement between the movements. It touches what words cannot. And in its clarity, intention becomes a tuning fork. Every thought becomes a note. Every emotion a chord. Every action a vibration that ripples into the fabric of the real. You are no longer thinking to survive. You are thinking to remember, to restore the original harmony between the soul and the field. And in doing so, you no longer speak to the world as a stranger. You speak to it as part of it, as one who remembers the language of light. Chapter 5, The Alchemy of Thought. There are thoughts that pass through like wind, and there are thoughts that burn. Not because they are louder, but because they are fused with emotion, and emotion, when fully felt, is fire. We have misunderstood emotion as something to endure or suppress, as if it were an interruption to clarity. But emotion is vibration made visible. It is the sacred heat that gives the shape to the invisible. It is not the enemy of thought. It is its catalyst. Every intention that carries power is not born of logic, but of feeling, not the turbulent chaos of reaction, but the refined resonance of presence. Ancient alchemists did not seek to turn lead into gold for the sake of wealth. They sought the internal transmutation of dense states into luminous ones. Paracelsus wrote of this fire, not a literal flame, but the subtle fire of consciousness when aligned with emotion and directed by will. This is the alchemy few remember, that your thoughts are not contained in the skull, but are elemental instruments echoing into the field, shaping it as surely as weather shapes earth. When you feel with awareness and think with precision, you are no longer reacting to the world. You are shaping it. You are not a passive observer of matter. You are the priest within the temple, conducting vibration into form. The sacred traditions did not trivialize language. They revered it. In the Kabbalah, the letters themselves are seen not as symbols of sound, but as vessels of energy. In the book of Genesis, the universe was not constructed by hand, but by voice, and God said, "Let there be light." He did not build. He declared. The word was not commentary. It was causality. And so it is with you. Every word you speak carries the echo of creation. Every sentence is a spell, not in fantasy, but in physics. Language is not benign. It is direction. It reveals your alignment, your clarity, your depth. To speak without consciousness is to scatter energy. But to speak from coherence is to command the field without force. You have been speaking spells your entire life. Every sentence you utter, every silent thought you rehearse, is either constructing coherence or unraveling it. Most of these spells are unconscious, inherited, reactive. Sentences passed down like ancestral echoes. I'm not good enough. Nothing ever works out. I'll never change. These are not simply negative thoughts. They are agreements. And agreements, once spoken, begin to seek manifestation. The universe is not a judge. It is a mirror. It does not weigh the merit of your words. It responds to their frequency. When you speak from contraction, you summon more contraction. When you speak from alignment, the field bends gently to meet you. Neville Goddard understood that the most potent form of creation was not external action, but inner embodiment. Imagination, for him, was not daydreaming. It was causation. To imagine vividly, emotionally, and with persistence was to sow reality at its root, not through effort, but through resonance. The world, he taught, is your reflected consciousness. And if you wish to see change outside, you must first die and rise again within, not through ritual, but through the sacred act of assuming a new identity before its evidence appears. This is not wishful thinking. This is vibrational precision. It is the quiet mastery of inner atmosphere. And it begins not with effort, but with attention. The sacred alchemist does not rush to manifest. They prepare the vessel. And the vessel is the self, the mind, the breath, the emotional tone, the clarity of thought. Consciousness becomes the laboratory, and presence becomes the fire beneath the flask. You do not need more willpower. You need inner stillness strong enough to hold your vision without leaking energy through fear. This is the forgotten discipline, not to act constantly, but to think cleanly, to become internally coherent enough that your thoughts no longer contradict your being. That what you desire is not sabotaged by what you expect. That what you imagine is not distorted by what you silently fear. When this alignment occurs, manifestation is not forced. It is inevitable. You are not separate from the laws of creation. You are not a guest in the cosmos, waiting for permission to shape your reality. You are its extension, its living intention. To think is to sculpt the subtle. To feel is to infuse it with life. To speak is to anchor it in matter. The ancient mystics knew this, that emotion was not weakness but flame, that word was not noise but wand, that consciousness was not just a lens but a womb. Your awareness is the altar. Your attention is the prayer. And your imagination, when aligned with heart and silence, is prophecy unfolding in real time. We forget because we've been trained to remember only what is measurable. But the sacred cannot be measured, only entered. And the deeper you go into this remembering, the more you begin to feel the inner echo of creation itself. Every thought you choose becomes a seed in sacred soil. Some will blossom quickly, others will rest, waiting for your belief to mature. But none are wasted. Your reality is not being written by fate. It is being carved from within, word by word, image by image, tone by tone. The mind is not an enemy to be silenced. It is a temple to be cleansed. And when its chambers are cleared, every sentence you speak becomes a line in the scripture of your becoming. To practice this alchemy is not to master the universe. It is to harmonize with it, to speak less, but with reverence, to think less, but with clarity, to feel more, but with presence. It is not dramatic or loud. It is subtle, like breath through a flute, like gold forming in the dark. You begin to see that your most sacred task is not to fix what is broken, but to remember what is whole. You are not casting spells to change the world. You are tuning your inner field until the outer world becomes coherent with your essence. And when that happens, it does not feel like power. It feels like love, precise, radiant, inevitable. Not an escape from the world, but an invitation to meet it from within, as the alchemist you always were. Chapter 6. The Matrix of Normality. There is a kind of silence more dangerous than noise. The silence of agreement, of unconscious compliance, of millions walking in rhythm with a rhythm they never chose. It is the lullaby of the system, sung not to soothe but to subdue. You were born into a world already designed, with meanings assigned, roles defined, and scripts written long before your first breath. The names you were given, the borders you were taught to respect, the clocks you were made to follow, none of it came from your essence. You inherited a rhythm, and without knowing, you began to dance to it. This is the matrix not of machines, but of meaning. The true prison is not built of stone or steel. It is constructed in the psyche, a structure of beliefs, conditioned responses, cultural scripts, and invisible permissions. Gurdjieff warned that most humans live in a state of waking sleep, dreaming they are awake, acting with precision but without presence. He did not mean it metaphorically. He meant that we perform life rather than live it, moving through the motions of what is called normal, never pausing to ask, who wrote this script and why? The danger of normality is that it appears kind. It rewards you when you comply. It congratulates you when you follow the known path. It offers safety in exchange for silence. It celebrates the mask and fears the mirror. But underneath its surface lies a quiet erasure of intuition, of inner fire, of truth untamed. Michel Foucault understood this when he spoke of power not as force, but as invisible architecture. You do not have to be shackled to be controlled. You simply have to believe that your cage is the world, that the walls are there for your protection. That deviation is disorder. And so the soul, wild and radiant, begins to fold itself into the shape of acceptability, until even its longing feels like a problem. To awaken within such a structure is not a matter of rebellion. It is an act of remembrance. For the codes that govern society are not merely enforced through laws or institutions, but through repetition and reward. A child learns not just what to think, but how to think, what questions are allowed, which truths are negotiable, and which must never be touched. Over time, this indoctrination grows silent, embedding itself in the neural pathways like a sacred geometry inverted. The matrix does not demand that you conform. It simply exhausts your will to question. You begin to speak in borrowed words. You learn to desire what others desire, to fear what the collective fears. You internalize the system not because you are weak, but because it is elegant in its design, wrapping itself around your sense of identity until you believe that your longing for more is immaturity, that your hunger for freedom is impractical, that your intuition is irrational. And thus, you trade your wildness for predictability. The unknown becomes threat. The inner call becomes noise. The dream becomes indulgence. And all the while, the program whispers, "Stay here. You're safe. You're normal." But normality is not peace. It is forgetfulness. It is the erasure of the soul's original memory. George Orwell foresaw a world where truth would be rewritten, where history would be manipulated, and where language itself would be turned into a tool of containment. Yet he did not predict a world where people would willingly participate in their own confinement, where surveillance would become convenience, where silence would be mistaken for civility, where the sacred would be privatized into lifestyle. And so we scroll, consume, conform, while the inner voice grows fainter until we mistake its absence for healing. But healing does not silence the soul, it amplifies it. And in the quiet desperation of this matrix, that voice begins again, small at first, then rising. This is not all there is. The greatest illusion of the matrix is not that it deceives, but that it convinces you there is nothing to wake up from. You are taught to fear insanity more than captivity, to value comfort more than truth. And so, even as the soul sends signals, through anxiety, through existential ache, through moments of strange clarity in the stillness before sleep, the system supplies its tranquilizers: entertainment, distraction, ambition, ideology. Each a mask of meaning that promises to pacify the sacred unrest rather than honor it. And yet, somewhere in the marrow of your being, a strange light stirs, not loud, not urgent, but ancient and undeniable. This light has no origin in the world. It is not taught in schools nor broadcast through screens. It arrives without credentials. It speaks in fragments, images, sensations, longings. And when you follow it, even slightly, the veil begins to loosen. You notice the rehearsed scripts in conversations. You see the loops in the news cycle. You begin to detect the architecture behind the real, not with fear, but with awe. For what collapses is not the world, but the illusion of separation from your own soul. This is what the mystics knew, what the sages whispered, what the rebels of spirit lived for. Not escape, but remembrance. You are not here to fit in. You are here to remember what the world forgot in you, to reawaken the truth that normality was never the measure of wholeness, that the longing you carry is not a defect, but a compass, that behind the veil of the visible, behind the customs and flags and roles, there is a you that never forgot why it came. And once you remember, truly remember, the matrix cannot hold you. You may still walk within it, but it no longer defines you. You become like a lucid dreamer, present, yet free. And it is from this lucid place that the journey into deeper layers of soul begins. The voice that once whispered now becomes a guide, and the prison that once held you becomes a path. Chapter 7. The Soul Remembers. There are moments, sudden, weightless, when something ancient stirs within you. It is not memory in the conventional sense, bound to a face, a date, or a name. It is older than language, deeper than image. It is a sensation, as if a place you've never been suddenly feels like home, or a piece of music opens a corridor to a realm you thought you had imagined as a child. In that instant, you do not remember with the brain, but with the soul. And the soul does not recall as humans do. It resonates, it recognizes. What rises is not recollection, but a knowing that has no source in this world. A knowing that refuses to be reasoned away. We call it déjà vu, nostalgia, instinct. But what if it is none of these? What if it is the soul, whispering across dimensions, reminding you that you did not begin with your birth and will not end with your death? What if the strange longing you feel for the stars is not poetic metaphor, but homesickness in its truest form? The Urantia papers speak of an indwelling presence, the thought adjuster, a divine fragment of God that accompanies us, recording, shaping, guiding. What it remembers is not only your life, but your origin before embodiment. And it is this divine memory, echoing within you, that makes the silence at night feel holy, that makes the sight of a galaxy, the sound of a newborn's cry, or the kindness of a stranger feel somehow familiar, as if you have been here before, though never quite like this. To awaken is not to discover something new, but to allow what has always been to rise again. Carl Jung called these echoes archetypes, imprints in the collective unconscious, but perhaps they are more than mere patterns. Perhaps they are the footprints of our soul across lifetimes, embedded in the soil of eternity. Perhaps your inexplicable pull toward the sacred, your fascination with ancient symbols, or your quiet tears when no one is watching are not signs of fragility, but of remembrance. The soul, after all, is a traveler, not a tourist. It doesn't accumulate moments, it transmits frequency. And when something in this life harmonizes with its deeper song, the veil thins. You feel it, not in the mind, but in the marrow. Sometimes what awakens you is not beauty, but ache, a sorrow that does not belong to this moment, yet lingers in your chest like an ancient song. You grieve for things you cannot name, people you've never met, worlds you've never walked in this life. But what if your sorrow is not misplaced? What if your soul has carried stories across dimensions, silently watching the collapse and rebirth of civilizations, the rise and fall of suns, the prayers of hearts long forgotten by history? The book of Urantia whispers that the soul survives beyond death not as a vague impression, but as a conscious continuity, guided by the thought adjuster, the indwelling spark of divinity. If this is true, then the soul is not merely a passenger, but a pilgrim, on a long arc of return toward the source, gathering wisdom from each world it inhabits. Jan Val Elam speaks of interdimensional beings who carry echoes of memory between incarnations, not as ghosts, but as seeds planted deep within the inner garden of the soul. These are not hallucinations or fantasies, but sacred fragments, clues from a divine puzzle we are slowly reassembling. Perhaps this is why you cry at the sight of stars, or why the vastness of the ocean stirs something sacred within you. Perhaps you have touched other skies. Perhaps you have known other suns. The soul, like a river, remembers every mountain it flowed from, every stone it embraced on its way to the sea. It knows where it has been, even if your mind does not. Jung believed in the language of dreams, not because they were irrational, but because they spoke the deeper grammar of the soul. Archetypes, he said, are not inventions, but inheritances, expressions of a timeless self that longs for integration. When you dream of flying, of being chased, of reuniting with someone you've never met. What if these are not symbols, but signals? Traces of other lifetimes, lives layered like petals around your essence. Brian Weiss opened the gates to the memory of past lives, revealing how trauma, love, and wisdom transcend the walls of one incarnation. Not to romanticize the past, but to heal the present. Because every soul, if quieted enough, will remember that it is not broken, only fragmented. And every piece longs to come home. You are not lost. You are remembering. The ache you carry is not failure. It is the tremor of reawakening. The veil that once cloaked your perception begins to thin not through effort, but through surrender. You do not need to force your way into enlightenment. You need only to listen. Beneath the noise of the world, there is a hum, the soft murmur of something ancient calling you back to yourself. The Urantia teachings suggest that the thought adjuster, the indwelling fragment of the Universal Father, guides this sacred remembrance. It does not shout. It does not coerce. It whispers through intuition, through the strange feeling that something invisible is walking beside you. This voice does not originate in your mind, yet it knows your thoughts before you think them. It is the most intimate stranger and the oldest friend. As the soul begins to listen, the dream changes. What once seemed random begins to shimmer with purpose. Encounters feel orchestrated. Places you've never been before feel familiar. People you've just met carry a familiarity that transcends logic. Not because of shared history, but because of soul recognition. You begin to trust that there's a deeper map beneath the map. That memory is not confined to neurons, but is inscribed in the very vibration of your being. You are not merely remembering who you are remembering that you are part of something vast and interwoven. The illusion of separation, of linear time, of fixed identity, begins to dissolve like mist in morning light. And in its place, you find a sense of belonging that does not need to be explained, only honored. To remember is not to regress. It is to return to the wholeness that was never truly broken. The memory of a soul is not linear, it is holographic. One moment of deep presence can open the vaults of lifetimes. One act of forgiveness can redeem centuries. And one breath, taken with awareness, can reconnect you with the divine intention that brought you here. You are not a random spark. You are a traveler with sacred coordinates. You did not fall into this life by accident. You were sent. Not as punishment, but as poetry, not to escape the world, but to illuminate it from within. And when the soul remembers, truly remembers, even the stars begin to whisper your name again, not as a question, but as a homecoming. Chapter 8, Parallel Selves, Infinite Choices. There are moments, quiet, flickering, when reality seems to hesitate. As if the world pauses, inhales, and in that single breath, 1,000 paths open like veins of light branching through possibility. You might be standing at a threshold, or lost in thought on a morning train, or simply tying your shoes, when something stirs in the back of your awareness, an inexplicable knowing. A ripple, faint but undeniable, that says, "You've been here before, but not quite like this." It is not memory, not entirely. It is a shadow of a decision made differently elsewhere, a whisper from a self who turned left instead of right. And in that haunting familiarity, déjà vu becomes not a glitch, but a glimpse of you beside you, in a life just slightly tilted from your own. Quantum physics does not scoff at such ideas anymore. In Hugh Everett's Many Worlds interpretation, every choice spawns a new universe, branching endlessly. You decide to stay. Another you walks away. You speak, another remains silent. And from these infinitesimal divergences, entire worlds unfold, not metaphorically, but mathematically. In the soft logic of dreams and the hard elegance of equations, reality begins to shimmer not as a fixed stage, but as a living matrix of frequencies. Every decision is not merely an event, it is a tuning fork. And the self, like a string on a cosmic instrument, vibrates according to the resonance of those choices. What you call intuition may be the echo of those frequencies, a bleed-through from parallel timelines whispering, "This path holds light, that one loss." The Urantia teachings, in their own language of soul evolution, describe free will not as an illusion, but as the axis around which universes bend. Choice is not trivial. It is sacred. It is the very act through which personality interfaces with eternity. You are not a victim of a predestined script. You are the quill, the parchment, the ink, and the breath that writes. Even dreams, so often dismissed, may be fragments of adjacent lives, pieces of a soul moving between dimensions in the sleep of the body. What if your dream self is not fiction, but a parallel traveler, returning from a reality just out of reach? What if déjà vu is a moment where the lines briefly converge, where parallel timelines shimmer close enough to kiss? And what if those flickers of insight, those sudden, unearned knowings, are your soul brushing against itself across dimensions? In the high mountains of the Andes, elders speak of time not as a straight arrow, but as a circle that walks beside you. The past is behind, yes, but also in front, within, and above. The future is not somewhere distant, but something already whispering in your bones. They do not speak in terms of chronology, but of vibrations. What manifests in one reality is the blossoming of countless energetic seeds planted across many. This ancestral knowledge, often veiled in metaphor, aligns with what some physicists now suggest. Time may be emergent, not fundamental. Reality, then, is not a line but a field, and each decision we make sends a pulse into that field, a pulse that not only shapes what we experience, but also magnetizes parallel possibilities into coherence. Carl Jung once remarked that what we call coincidence is merely a name we give to events for which we have yet to recognize the deeper pattern. Synchronicities, those strange poetic alignments that defy logic, may be more than signs. They may be the footprints of your other selves brushing close. When you think of someone and they call, when you hear a song at the perfect moment, when a sentence in a book seems to address your soul, perhaps you are being shown that the veil is thinner than you believe. These are not accidents. These are reminders. They say, your life is not solitary. It is symphonic, and your soul, the conductor, weaves these parallel strands not to confuse you, but to awaken you to your own multidimensionality. The Urantia Book offers a cosmology that speaks to this symphony of choice. It proposes that while we walk one thread of experience in this material dimension, our thought adjuster, the indwelling divine fragment, perceives a fuller tapestry. It sees you not as a single being in time, but as a soul in motion, stretched across possibility. Your longing, your curiosity, your dreams, these are not merely personal. They are signals, beacons cast into the quantum sea, resonating with versions of yourself that have chosen differently. And sometimes, just sometimes, the walls grow thin enough that a whisper makes it through. A pull toward a new city, an inexplicable urge to change direction, a dream that won't let go. And in those moments, you're not just imagining a different life. You are remembering it. You are not the sum of your memories alone. You are also the breath of decisions you did not make, and yet felt. Every possibility you have sensed but not followed. Every fork in the road that stirred your intuition but remained unexplored still lives in a field of vibrating resonance. These are not simply dismissed fictions or fleeting thoughts. In a four-dimensional framework, they are alive, encoded with meaning, and they hum like distant stars waiting to be seen again. Each soul is a prism, refracting light into timelines of color and texture that the waking mind cannot fully comprehend, but the soul can. When you feel a yearning you cannot name, when you dream of places you've never been but miss like home, you are grazing against one of your infinite echoes. In the silence between choices, there is a sacred trembling. That trembling is not fear, it is potential. It is the multiverse leaning in to listen to the frequency you will broadcast with your next thought, your next intention, your next yes or no. This is why awareness is not optional. It is alchemy. You are never just making a choice. You are tuning a universe. The fields of your being ripple outward, not just through your body, but through dimensions. And in some of those dimensions, you are the healer, the artist, the mystic, the explorer, the beloved. You're also the one who never left. And when you quiet the noise of linear thought, you can feel them, not as memories, but as presences, as collaborators in the unfolding masterpiece of your soul's journey. In this quantum dance of selves and strands, free will becomes more than a concept. It becomes your creative brush, your tuning fork, your access point to the divine workshop. The Urantia revelation reminds us that choice is sacred, that even the adjuster, that fragment of pure divinity within, can only work with what you consent to imagine. You are not at the mercy of fate. You are a sculptor of destiny. And in every breath, every brave act of faith, you bring more of yourself and of the cosmos into coherence. The path you walk is real, but not fixed. It is a song you are composing with every beat of your becoming. And somewhere, in the vastness of what is possible, the other yous are listening, dancing, dreaming too. Not apart, but together, humming the memory of unity in 1,000 tongues of light. Chapter 9. The Silent Force of Language. There is a silence that speaks, and a word that does not need to be spoken to create. Before the world was shaped into form, before matter unfolded its geometry, there was vibration, and vibration carried the seed of language. Not the kind that clings to definitions or echoes from the tongue, but the one that rises from the soul and bends the veil between spirit and substance. In the beginning, it is said, the Word was with God, and the Word was God. But this word was not a sentence. It was a pulse, a sacred rhythm, an original breath echoing through the void. To speak, in this sense, is not merely to communicate. It is to call into being. And to remain unaware of this force is to conjure unconsciously. To spell without knowing one is casting spells. Every sound carries a frequency, and every frequency is a builder of reality. The ancients knew this well. In the Kabbalah, each letter is not merely a symbol, but a living essence, a sapphira of creative power. The Hebrew alphabet itself is a staircase between realms, each utterance aligned with angelic flows, divine patterns, and vibrational harmonics. The Hermetists taught that all is vibration, that rhythm is the signature of the universe, and that to know the rhythm is to ride the wave of manifestation instead of being drowned by it. Words are not empty containers. They are sacred vessels. They shape emotion, influence biology, alter timelines. They are the hidden architects of the temple of perception. To name is to summon. To name is to shape. When you name your fear, it loses its mask. When you name your longing, it begins to open paths. When you name your purpose, it begins to stir from the deep. The soul does not respond to chatter or noise. It listens for precision, for resonance. There's a reason why silence often precedes revelation, because the right word is not forced into being. It emerges. It arrives like rain after drought, like fire igniting soaked wood. The word of Urantia is not static text, but living light, an architecture of divine memory, echoing through consciousness. In the adjuster's whisper, there is no grammar, only frequency. It is not what is said, but the vibratory integrity of what is felt while saying it that opens the veils. Language, then, is the bridge, not from one person to another, but from the inner world to the unseen realms. The alphabet, in its sacred geometry, is not a tool of civilization alone. It is the language of the stars encoded into the breath of mortals. Each syllable, when aligned with intention, resonates like a tuning fork within the unseen scaffolding of the cosmos. The Kabbalah does not speak of letters as human invention, but as pre-existent emanations, sparks of divine will cascading through the tree of life. They are not learned, but remembered, as if they reside not on paper, but in the soul's ancestral library. When one speaks from presence, the words do not fall to the ground. They rise. They do not describe reality. They invoke it. Even science, inching ever closer to the ineffable, begins to tremble before this truth. Cymatics shows us how frequency arranges matter. A spoken word, when properly intoned, reveals symmetrical patterns etched in sand, water, light. Language is not metaphorical magic. It is literal architecture. The difference between destruction and healing can lie in a single word, whispered with reverence or shouted in fear. Children absorb language not as instruction, but as frequency. This is why trauma wounds through words, and healing begins when new words are offered. Words not merely spoken, but believed, inhabited, embodied. There is a speech beyond language, an utterance that does not pass through the mouth, but through the center of being. Rumi heard it and called it the music of the soul. The Book of Urantia echoes this when it describes the living word, not frozen in scripture, but alive in the adjuster's breath, resonating beyond syntax. This word does not speak to the ears, but to the memory of eternity within us. It does not command, it awakens. It does not explain, it remembers. And perhaps this is why the prophets spoke in poetry and symbols, for the truth they carried could not fit within the narrow confines of literal speech. To hear them required a different kind of listening, one that bypasses reason and travels straight into the heart's ancient chamber. To name something is not merely to identify. It is to invoke, to declare its place in the web of reality. In Genesis, the divine does not craft with hands, but with voice. Let there be light. And there was. This is not poetry, it is principle. The word is not a vehicle of creation. It is creation itself in motion. Naming is a divine prerogative, a sacred gesture that binds vibration into form. When we call someone beloved, we awaken the resonance of love in them. When we call ourselves unworthy, we weave that identity into the very lattice of our becoming. Words are not harmless. They are spells, each one shaping the clay of consciousness into a face we will one day meet. The Hermetic law of vibration reminds us that everything moves, everything pulses, everything sings. Even silence is full of language, for it hums with the anticipation of expression. Every heartbeat is a drum, every breath a lyric. When we speak, we do not break silence, we sculpt it. And the rhythm of our speech either aligns with the great harmonic of a universe or clashes against it. Thus, language is not to be thrown like stones, but offered like incense. The wise do not speak to impress, but to harmonize. Their words are chosen not for cleverness, but for resonance. A single sentence, born of deep stillness, can rewire destinies more powerfully than volumes uttered from noise. There is a word beneath all words, a voice that does not come from the tongue, but from the soul. The Urantia Book calls it the living word, the echo of the divine thought adjuster speaking within us. It does not argue or convince. It simply is. And when you hear it, you do not understand. You remember. You do not translate. You awaken. That voice has always been speaking, but only now do you begin to listen. And once you do, language becomes something else entirely. Not a tool for survival, not a currency of the mind, but a sacred bridge between what is seen and what longs to be born. Chapter 10. Time is a living presence. Time is not a line you walk upon, but a field you breathe through. It does not pass you, it surrounds you. It is not a ticking of clocks, but a pulsing of presence. We have been taught to see it as a relentless arrow aimed forward, dragging our past behind us like a shadow, too heavy to forget. But what if time is not a jailer, but a companion? Not a sequence of moments lost, but a single vast breath unfolding? The ancient Egyptians did not speak of time as duration, but as jet and nihe, eternity that is static and eternity that flows. They felt the divine not in chronology, but in the circular dance between becoming and being. To them, to live aligned with Ma'at was to walk in rhythm with the eternal present. The past was not gone. The future was not unknown. All was here. Modern quantum physics dares to brush this ancient intuition with new language. In the paradoxes of retrocausality, where the future seems to touch the past, we glimpse what sages have always known. Time listens both forward and backward. Choices echo, not just into what will be, but into what has been. You are not only shaped by your childhood, you are reshaping it now with every act of love or fear. Trauma is not only a scar of yesterday, but an imprint that can be softened by the tenderness of today. In the cathedral of your consciousness, the past kneels before the now, asking not to be erased, but to be remembered differently. Memory is not static. It is vibrational, and vibration responds to presence. You do not heal by forgetting what was, but by entering what is with enough grace to re-sing the story. The Urantia Book whispers a similar mystery, that time and space are not obstacles but instruments, scaffolding for soul development, arenas for decision, textures for the dance of will. Time is given not to age you, but to awaken you. The thought adjuster does not operate in hours, but in alignments. The more present you are, the more eternity slips in. The more you dissolve the illusion of linearity, the more the Father's presence becomes not a distant goal, but a gentle voice humming through every instant. Time bends, and in its bend, the sacred hides, not in destinations, but in density of awareness. You do not move through time. Time unfolds through you. There are moments when a scent, a song, a certain angle of light pouring through a window stirs something ancient in you, something that doesn't belong to the timeline you were taught. It's not nostalgia, not déjà vu, but a soul event bleeding through the veil. In that instant, the boundary between past and present fractures, and eternity peaks through the aperture of your awareness. This is not imagination, it is resonance. Vibration is the true language of the cosmos, and your soul remembers by tuning itself like a string to the frequencies of forgotten truths. The presence of the moment becomes the key to unlock all other moments, because presence is the only place where time is soft enough to be reshaped. In the stillness of true awareness, the past can kneel and be rewritten by the energy you bring now. This is the alchemy of healing, not the denial of what was, but the radical transformation of its meaning through love's vibration. Eckhart Tolle speaks of the now not as a fleeting instant, but as a living dimension, an ever-unfolding field where time's illusion dissolves and the eternal reveals itself. In that sacred now, there is no past to regret or future to chase, only the vast cathedral of consciousness vibrating with divine intention. The present moment is not a bridge between what was and what will be. It is the throne of what always is. From that throne, your soul governs reality, not as a tyrant of control, but as a witness of unfolding wonder. Time does not flee from you. It bows to your awareness. In the now, you are both observer and creator, both student and sage. Time, when held gently, becomes translucent, and through it, you see the architecture of the soul's journey etched in golden spirals of becoming. To the ancient mind, especially among the Egyptian mystics, time was not a threat but a companion, one that measured not decay but alignment with eternal order. The scarab rolling its sphere across the sand was not just a symbol of rebirth, but of cyclical, sacred time, of the soul returning to itself in greater and greater spirals of remembrance. We do not walk a straight road toward divinity. We rise in coils of consciousness, touching again and again the same point from new heights. Time, in this sense, is a staircase of vibration, and each present moment is a step. It is not that we lose the past or escape it. It is that we carry it into higher frequencies where its pain becomes power, its wound becomes wisdom, and its silence becomes song. In quantum physics, we stumble upon something ancient in modern attire: retrocausality. The unsettling and liberating notion that effects can influence causes, that the future can ripple backward into the past. Though it sounds like a paradox, it is poetry to the soul, which has always known this secret. Haven't you felt it? Those moments when a future self seemed to whisper guidance to your present confusion? When a version of you who had already healed reached through time to comfort the one who is still breaking. The laws of light are not bound by the linear corridors we call time. In truth, time is more like breath than arrow, more like ocean than clock. It moves in tides, not ticks. It flows with intention. When you anchor your consciousness in love, that vibration reverberates backward, forward, and inward, altering the timeline not by force, but by harmonic invitation. The Urantia teachings suggest that time and space are scaffolds for soul growth, not prisons for experience. Time is the chalkboard on which the adjuster of thought, that divine indweller, writes the curriculum of your becoming. And the lesson always is love. But love is not bound by time. It reaches across lifetimes, galaxies, and dimensions. It is the master key that turns the lock of every moment. When you love now, you redeem then. When you forgive now, you set free the ghost of your past and plant freedom in your future. Time becomes elastic under the fingers of grace. Eternity is not the absence of time, but the presence of all time sanctified by awareness. In this sacred vision, your life is not a string of events, but a symphony of resonances echoing through the temple of the now. And so, let us cease to see time as enemy or escape. Let us meet it as an old friend with secrets in its hands. Every second contains a seed, and when watered with presence, it blossoms into revelation. The past is not dead, it is listening. The future is not fixed, it is becoming. And the present is not passing, it is offering itself as the holy altar where all timelines kneel. This is the sacred architecture of existence. Not a line, but a spiral. Not a trap, but a teacher. Not a race, but a dance. In the stillness of your now, you are already eternal. And time, the ever-patient companion, waits not for your speed, but for your surrender. Only then will it reveal its true face, not of decay, but of becoming, not of distance, but of resonance, not of clocks, but of stars. Chapter 11, The Return to the Origin. There comes a moment, often disguised in silence, when the soul aches not for something new, but for something ancient, something it knew before memory learned to speak. A longing not born of lack, but of remembrance. This is not nostalgia. It is a gravitational pull from the sacred center of being, the whisper of the origin calling its fragment home. Beneath the layered identities we wear, roles, traumas, victories, and defeats, there remains a self untouched, a flame unscathed by wind or storm. It is not a version of you that must be created, but one that must be uncovered. The soul does not evolve into this essence. It remembers its way back to it. The mystics have always sung of this return. Rumi called it the journey back to the beloved, where every wound becomes a doorway and every exile a map. Kabir saw it in the still spaces between breath and name. The Theosophists traced it through the divine monad, the spark that individuates only to one day reunite. And the Urantia Book speaks of the universal Father, the first source and center, as the magnetic heart of all reality, forever drawing every conscious being back through the spirals of experience into communion with the infinite. This is not mere metaphor. This is the architecture of existence. The return is inscribed in your essence. You are encoded with homesickness for the divine. Yet, this return is not a retreat. It is an emergence. The path back to the origin does not lead to what you were before the pain. It leads to what you are beyond it. The original self is not a static memory, but a living presence waiting beneath the noise of thought. This is why the mystics retreat not into the past, but into the now. For in the stillness of pure consciousness, time folds in on itself, and the gates to the eternal open. The present moment becomes the sacred corridor where the self you lost and the self you are destined to become recognize each other and embrace. It is not a healing of time, it is the transcendence of it. The return to the origin is not a direction. It is a vibration. It is not where you go. It is what you allow yourself to become. To return to the origin is not to erase experience, but to transmute it. The fire that once burned now illuminates. The weight of sorrow becomes the gravity that anchors your spirit to something deeper than form. In this journey, pain is not the enemy, it is the lantern. Trauma is not the end, it is the veil, and through it, light can pass. The soul does not seek to forget the wounds, it seeks to find the wisdom they concealed. For before the scars, there was a self that observed them without confusion, a self that did not flinch, did not divide, did not fear. And though buried beneath layers of conditioning and reaction, that self waits patiently, like a pearl hidden within the ocean of memory. The Christian mystics understood this return not as regression, but as sacred reintegration. Meister Eckhart wrote of the divine spark within the soul, a fragment of God itself. Julian of Norwich spoke of the wanting of the soul with the divine, a restoration of original harmony that transcends time. This reintegration is not philosophical, it is experiential, and it is not reserved for saints or prophets. The door is always ajar for those who become still enough to see it. Consciousness, in its purest form, becomes the portal, not through striving, but through surrender. Not by doing more, but by being more aware. In the luminous presence of now, the ego dissolves, the masks fall, and what remains is the unshakable sense that you have always been more than you believed. The teachings of the Urantia Book echo this with celestial clarity. The Father is not distant, nor abstract, but the very center from which all consciousness flows. Each adjuster, silently indwelling within, is not a voice imposed upon the soul, but the echo of its own forgotten origin. The Father fragments himself, not to control, but to awaken. Every act of awareness is a whisper from eternity. Every stirring of compassion, a memory of what you are. And so, as consciousness expands, the illusion of separation contracts. You do not need to seek the divine as if it were missing. You need only become transparent enough for it to shine through you. The origin is not somewhere else. It is who you are when nothing else remains. In the silence between thoughts, the origin speaks, not in words, but in recognition. That moment when the stars seem to pulse in rhythm with your breath, when a forgotten scent collapses time and memory into a single tear, when the laughter of a child feels like a message from before you were born. These are not coincidences. They are recollections of the eternal self. As Rumi whispered, "You were born with wings. Why prefer to crawl through life?" The soul is not a product of evolution, but its guide. It is not created by time. It travels through it, gathering the fragrance of experience, but never losing its scent of home. The longing you carry is not a flaw. It is evidence of your belonging. Kabir sang of the beloved not as a distant deity, but as the music that hums beneath every heartbeat. He knew what the mystics of every age have whispered in cloisters and deserts, that to return is to awaken, and to awaken is to remember. The Theosophists called this memory the monadic fire, the divine spark that remains untainted regardless of form, lifetime, or forgetting. It is this fire that pulls you inward when the world grows too loud. It is this fire that keeps glowing even beneath layers of trauma, bitterness, or disbelief. And when the soul is still enough, the flame becomes visible again, not as a beacon to follow, but as a mirror of what you always were. To return to the origin is not to retreat from the world, but to inhabit it more fully. It is to walk with the awareness that each being is carrying a fragment of the infinite, that the ground itself is sacred because it holds the footprints of God, that your presence, when truly felt, is a blessing to the cosmos. The Father, as described in the Urantia revelation, is not merely above or beyond, but within and through. To know him is to remember your first name, spoken before language. It is to sense the thrill of being not separate, but essential. And in that realization, all seeking ends, not in exhaustion, but in arrival. For you never truly left the origin. You only forgot. And now, the remembering has begun. Chapter 12, The Sacred Circle of Others. No soul walks alone, not truly. Beneath the illusion of separation, existence is woven with golden threads of convergence. Every glance that lingers, every stranger whose presence stirs a memory you cannot name, every meeting that feels like déjà vu rather than chance. These are not accidents. They are awakenings. There are those whose footsteps echo in the chambers of our soul before they ever speak. Souls we have known beyond time, beyond form, beyond language. Some arrive to soothe, some to challenge, some to mirror the wounds we dared not face alone. But all are sacred. The ancient ones knew we do not grow in isolation. The Andean peoples, the Navajo, the Aboriginal dreamwalkers, they all spoke of the circle, not as a shape, but as a principle. In the circle, no one is above or below. There is no hierarchy, only harmony. The circle holds space for each voice, each story, each soul's rhythm. It is the geometry of spirit. And in this sacred geometry, others are not obstacles or ornaments. They are instruments of remembering. To sit in circle is to be seen and to see, to recognize in the eyes of another the flicker of the same eternal flame. The Urantia text whispers of friendship as more than affection. It is a spiritual value, a divine resonance between evolving beings. In the great climb toward perfection, we are given companions, not to carry us, but to remind us why we walk. These companions may appear in fleeting moments or endure lifetimes, but each carries a purpose encoded in light. Some come as mirrors, showing us what still aches within. Some come as guides, holding a lantern we have forgotten we carried. Others come to break us, only so we may discover we were never truly broken. And when the heart is soft enough, open enough, it begins to recognize the language beyond words, the ancient contract written before embodiment. I will meet you again, and together we will remember. Every encounter is an echo, sometimes soft, like the whisper of a forgotten lullaby, sometimes loud, like the breaking of a mirror we didn't know we were holding. But always, each meeting carries within it a resonance, an ancient vibration reminding us of something primordial. The soul does not recognize the surface. It recognizes the frequency. And so we are drawn to certain people without knowing why, and repelled by others who never spoke a word. This silent recognition is the language of memory older than the mind. It is the sacred pull of pre-incarnational agreements, made in realms of light where we promise to help each other remember, awaken, heal, or evolve. Khalil Gibran once wrote that our relationships are not meant to bind, but to stretch us like strings of a lute whose music arises only when tension and distance are balanced. Love, then, is not the merging into one, but the sacred dance of two flames nourishing each other without losing their own light. In this dance, pain too is an offering, because sometimes it is through the ones who wound us that we find the doorway to our deepest truths. They provoke the fire that reveals our hidden fears, our unhealed stories, our false beliefs about worth and love. And while the ego resists, the soul bows, for it remembers the pact. You will hurt me, it said, but through you, I will find myself. In transpersonal psychology, we no longer ask merely what happened to you, but what is your soul trying to learn through this? The other becomes not just a person, but a symbol, an archetype, a key to a locked chamber within the self. This is not to romanticize abuse or suffering, but to retrieve agency from the ruins. It is to see through the lens of spirit and say, there is more here than meets the eye. The mirror does not lie. It merely reflects what is present. And when we dare to truly look, we begin to see that every face we meet is showing us who we are, who we were, or who we are becoming. In the teachings of indigenous wisdom, especially among the Andean and North American peoples, the sacred circle is not just a shape, it is a cosmology. To sit in circle is to remember that no one stands above and no one is left behind. Every being, every voice, every presence carries medicine. In these traditions, relationships are not resources to be used or stories to be consumed. They are sacred contracts, woven into the soul's path before breath entered the lungs. To betray a relationship is to step outside the circle of harmony. To honor it is to align with the rhythm of the universe itself. The elders remind us that we are never alone, not because we are surrounded by others, but because we are woven into the web of all that lives and has ever lived. The Urantia Book echoes this sacred truth in the celestial value it attributes to friendship and cooperation. In its vast cosmology, even divine beings collaborate, each consciousness acting as both sovereign and servant in the orchestration of divine will. If the gods themselves choose companionship, if celestial orders move through mutual recognition and shared purpose, how much more profound is the call for us, in our human frailty, to seek the sacred in each other, to walk with others not as competitors or saviors, but as co-dreamers of a reality where no soul is forgotten, no lesson wasted, no heart unloved. To see the other is to see God's face wearing a different mask, sometimes smiling, sometimes grieving, sometimes mirroring a wound we thought we buried, but always inviting, always asking, "Will you remember who I am to you?" In this remembrance, the illusion of separation dissolves. The stranger becomes brother, the adversary becomes teacher, the beloved becomes gateway, and we ourselves, once scattered among timelines and traumas, begin to return to wholeness, not alone, but in the sacred circle of others, where all souls meet and all love returns home. Chapter 13, Dreams, Symbols, and Hidden Realms. When the world sleeps and the conscious mind dissolves into stillness, a gate opens, unseen by waking eyes, yet ancient and enduring. Through this portal, the soul speaks its secret language, not in the syntax of logic, but in visions wrapped in metaphor, archetype, and mystery. Dreams are not mere echoes of the day's concerns. They are sacred whispers from dimensions where time is not linear, and truth wears the costume of myth. They carry the fragrance of realms beyond the visible, where angels speak in images and destiny unfolds in riddles. The soul, unburdened by the body's weight, travels there freely, remembering fragments of home, decoding patterns of becoming, and receiving guidance too deep for words. Carl Jung understood that the psyche does not reason, it reveals. It speaks to us in symbols, those timeless bridges between the visible and the invisible. The serpent, the river, the door, the bird, each a cipher of something older than civilization, deeper than theology. In dreams, these symbols surface not to entertain or confuse, but to initiate. The dreamer is invited not merely to observe, but to participate, to become the alchemist of meaning. For every dream is a mirror, and within its depths lies not only a message, but a map. Jung called it the collective unconscious. Others might call it the soul's archive, where our lives, past and future, are written in the ink of eternal recurrence. To interpret a dream is to court the divine, to sit at the feet of mystery and listen with the ears of the heart. And in these veiled journeys, not all realms are created equal. Some shimmer with light, others tremble with shadow, yet all are real in their own dimension. Edgar Cayce spoke of planes of consciousness layered like translucent veils, accessible through the trance of sleep or the sincerity of prayer. These hidden realms are not fantasy, but frequency. The Urantia Book affirms their existence, naming them as intermediary worlds, spaces between matter and spirit, staging grounds for evolution and revelation. Shamans, long before Casey or Urantia traversed these same corridors. In trance, in song, in the beat of the sacred drum, they walked between the worlds and returned bearing wisdom no book could teach. They knew what modern minds have forgotten, that reality is not a monolith but a tapestry, and in sleep, the soul remembers how to weave. The symbolic language of the soul is not bound by grammar or geography. It flows beneath our conscious structures like an underground river, timeless and borderless. Each image that arises in the quiet theater of dreams carries the weight of generations, the echo of myths, the scent of cosmic memory. This is not mere fantasy, it is remembrance. For every human being, whether they walk the streets of a modern city or the paths of an ancient forest, shares in this primordial lexicon. The archetypes are not inventions. They are inheritances. The mother, the hero, the trickster, the wise old man. These figures are carved into the inner walls of our being, as if the soul itself had sculpted them before descending into matter. They do not speak to the rational mind, but to the deep self who has never forgotten what it means to be divine. To dream is to enter a sacred theater where these archetypes dance. Sometimes they come in gentle gestures, sometimes in terrifying masks, but always in service of revelation. The night becomes a ceremony, the bed an altar. The mystics of old knew that dreams were not interruptions of reality, but expansions of it. For Edgar Cayce, dreams were messages from the soul's higher faculties, nudges from other planes, sometimes even glimpses of the Akashic field where all memories are stored. In dreams, one might encounter not only symbols, but places not of this earth, realities that shimmer like heat waves on the edge of knowing. Some return from these dreams altered, carrying wisdom they cannot explain, feeling the residue of a place no map can find. Others wake in tears, inexplicably homesick for a homeland they cannot name. The Urantia Book dares to articulate what many feel but cannot say, that there are intermediary worlds, places where matter thins and spirit thickens, where thought becomes form and silence becomes voice. These are not to be dismissed as imagination's playground. They are training grounds, sanctuaries, classrooms for the soul in transit. Shamans walk these paths consciously, their bodies rooted in earth while their spirits stretch beyond the stars. With eyes closed and hearts open, they become vessels for truths too subtle to be spoken aloud. Their visions are not dreams, they're dialogues. And in these dialogues, we learn that there is more to us than meets the mirror. We are layered, dimensional, woven into a web of consciousness that stretches across galaxies, incarnations, and ages. The soul does not forget what the mind dismisses. It speaks in symbols because symbols are bridges between the seen and unseen, the known and unknowable. A bird in a dream is not merely a bird. It may be the whisper of freedom, a messenger of the higher self, or the lingering echo of a past life once lived beneath open skies. A staircase is not just architecture. It might be the very structure of ascension, the soul reminding itself that it is not trapped in one form, one time, one world. Carl Jung understood that to heal the psyche, we must learn its symbolic tongue. The dream is not a lie, it is a cipher. It doesn't distort reality, it unveils it. And those who approach it with reverence begin to see that what they once thought was chaos is actually a choreography of meaning, designed by a deeper intelligence. This intelligence is not always sweet or comforting. The hidden realms are not playgrounds. They are sacred, demanding presence, humility, and courage. To see behind the veil is to risk losing the illusion of control. But it is also to remember something the world of waking forgets, that we are not random nor lost, but guided and layered, drawn by inner stars. The visions gifted by sleep, trance, or ceremony are not hallucinations to be dismissed, but pilgrimages the soul takes when the body is still. In these journeys, some meet beings of light. Others revisit the moment of their birth or glimpse the hour of their death. And some simply walk through strange landscapes that stir recognition without explanation, as if the dream were not conjuring something new, but awakening something ancient. The cosmos does not speak English or Spanish or Sanskrit. It speaks symbol. It speaks through dreams and through the spaces between dreams. And when we learn to listen with the ear behind the ear, to see with the eye behind the eye, we enter into communion with a realm as real as this one, perhaps more. These hidden realms are not meant to be conquered or even fully understood. They are meant to be honored. They are where the soul rehearses its divinity, where the future whispers to the present, and where the eternal speaks in the only language vast enough to contain it. The language of symbols, of stories, of mystery. It is here, in the heart of the night, that the soul remembers it was never alone, never lost, never separate. It was only dreaming of forgetting, so that it could one day remember, with awe, who it truly is. Chapter 14, Living Beyond Fear. Fear is not merely a reflex of the body. It is a residue of the soul's forgotten origin. It arises in the hollows of disconnection, where memory no longer whispers the truth of who we are. We fear because we remember, vaguely, painfully, that we were once whole. And that recollection, veiled and fragmented, casts a long shadow over our days. Fear is the ghost of a fall we cannot quite recall, the echo of a separation not fully understood. It is not born in the present moment, but in the mind's projections, the imagined failures, losses, humiliations, the dread of non-being. Yet what we call fear is often nothing more than the mind attempting to grasp what the soul already knows but cannot yet articulate. That the leap into the unknown is not death, but rebirth. To live beyond fear is not to suppress it, nor to pretend it doesn't exist, but to illuminate it. When fear is looked at without resistance, without naming, without judgment, as Krishnamurti taught, it begins to dissolve in the light of awareness. Observation is alchemy. In presence, fear loses its power to hypnotize. It was always the absence of light that gave it form. And as light is brought to it, not through force, but through attention, it reveals itself as the illusion it has always been. The Buddha understood this when he sat beneath the Bodhi tree and watched the wheel of suffering spin in the mind. Fear, suffering, desire, all tangled roots of the same tree, all born from the mind's illusion of separateness. But in stillness, they're seen for what they are, temporary weather patterns across the sky of consciousness. Faith is not blind belief. It is the deep and vibrating certainty that something greater than fear is holding us. It is not passive. It is a frequency, an act, a choice. It is the soul remembering its source. The Urantia Book speaks of faith not as doctrine, but as evolutionary trust, a growing confidence that the path leads somewhere holy, even if the feet do not yet see it. Faith does not argue with fear. It simply outshines it. It is the lamp in the cave, not because it vanquishes darkness with violence, but because it makes the darkness unnecessary. Joseph Campbell reminded us that the hero is not fearless, but courageous, and courage is what emerges when fear meets purpose. The hero's journey begins when one dares to go inward, to face the dragon at the gate, only to find that the dragon is made of smoke, and that beyond it lies not death, but the treasure of the self returned. The soul, when it begins to remember, does not shed fear as a snake sheds skin in one motion. It releases it layer by layer, breath by breath, choice by trembling choice. Fear is not only what paralyzes, it is what protects the threshold of awakening, for no one steps into truth without confronting what they once built to guard themselves from it. In that way, fear serves until it no longer does. It is the guardian of thresholds and the veil over gateways. But once the voice within dares to say yes, yes to life, yes to truth, yes to transformation, the veil begins to thin. And with every small act of courage, the veil becomes less a wall and more a mirror, reflecting the vastness we had forgotten. The teachings of the Buddha offered a map through this terrain, not to deny suffering or pretend joy into existence, but to become intimate with fear, to walk beside it, observe it without naming, and in that space be free. The suffering, he said, is not the pain itself, but the attachment to the illusion that we are the pain. The mind fears annihilation because it believes it is the whole self, but the soul knows otherwise. The soul has watched empires rise and fall within you. The soul has dreamed across centuries and chosen to return. Fear is only strong when we forget that. But when the soul stands up inside us, even for a moment, fear has no voice that can override the whisper of eternity. Faith in this context is not a doctrine handed down. It is the remembering of what the deeper self already knows. In the book of Urantia, faith is described not as a rigid belief, but as a growing certainty in the goodness of divine purpose, even amidst mystery. It is the bridge between the known and the infinite. To walk in faith is to walk as if you have already arrived at home, even when every sign says you are lost. And it is in this act of walking, step after invisible step, that the terrain shifts beneath your feet. Reality reorganizes to match the vibration of one who dares to believe that love is more real than fear, that truth is more enduring than doubt, and that courage is not the absence of trembling, but the embrace of it. Krishnamurti once whispered into the ears of those willing to listen that to observe fear without judgment is to disarm it. He did not teach that fear must be conquered, but that it must be seen naked without the mask of avoidance or the armor of resistance. In the still gaze of pure awareness, fear loses its power, for it feeds only in the shadows of unacknowledged mind. To live beyond fear is not to live without it, but to live so fully present that fear becomes a passing cloud in the eternal sky of being. Presence dissolves illusion, and in that dissolution, one encounters the real, the unmoved, the eternal, the self beneath the selves. This is the return to courage, not the loud courage of war cries or defiance, but the quiet, unwavering courage of showing up, open-hearted, undefended, and willing. The courage to say yes to your calling. The courage to be misunderstood. The courage to love when your heart has been shattered. The courage to live as if your soul had chosen every thread of your story for a purpose far greater than comfort. This is not bravery born of ego, but of surrender. And in that surrender, the self expands into its true shape, no longer contracted by fear's gravity. Courage is not the fire that burns the pain. It is the light that walks beside it, whispering, "We are more than this." And so we begin to walk differently, not ahead of fear, not behind it, but with it transformed into memory. Each step forward is a testament to the invisible architecture of faith built within. The Urantia teachings remind us that this faith is not naive hope, but a dynamic force, evolutionary in nature, drawing us toward our divine origin. The hero's journey, Campbell told us, is not about slaying dragons. It is about remembering who we were before the world told us to forget. To live beyond fear, then, is not to escape the dark, but to carry the flame. And in carrying it, we become the light that reminds others that the way home has always been within. Chapter 15, The Invitation of the Unknown. There comes a moment on the path where remembering is no longer enough. The soul, once stirred by visions of origin and whispers of eternity, begins to feel an ancient longing, not merely to observe the dance of life, but to shape it. To no longer be a spectator of stars, but a weaver of constellations. This is the invitation to become the creator again, not as the ego imagines through force, dominance, or manipulation, but as the soul remembers through vibration, intention, and deep inner alignment. The world does not bend to willpower. It bends to frequency. And so, the sacred responsibility of existence returns to our hands, not as burden, but as sacred privilege. Every thought is a brushstroke. Every emotion, a tone within the great symphony of becoming. The ancients knew this. The mystics whispered it in hidden chambers. Neville Goddard called it the law of assumption. The Hermetists declared, the all is mind. What you believe, you become. What you feel, you generate. What you imagine, you initiate in unseen realms long before it is born into matter. Creation begins within the inner temple of consciousness. And it is here, in this sanctum, that the greatest spiritual practice unfolds, not in rituals performed outwardly, but in the ceaseless tending of the garden of thought, word, and vibration. To become the creator again is to take back authorship of your life, not in rebellion against fate, but in communion with it. The universe is not a script written in stone, but a river responding to your movement. Your responsibility is not to control every outcome, but to become so vibrationally coherent that reality cannot help but mirror your essence. The Urantia text speaks of the Urantia soul, ever evolving, ever co-partnering with spirit to unfold divine potentials in time. In that collaboration lies the mystery. We are not merely children of God, but apprentices of the eternal. And our apprenticeship begins the moment we remember we were never only created, we were meant to create. True creation begins when the soul stops asking the world for permission. The moment we cease seeking validation from the outer illusion and begin communing with the stillness within, a portal opens, not to another dimension, but to the deepest layer of our own being. This is where reality is truly forged. We are not here to react to life, but to generate it. Not to echo the frequencies of fear or scarcity, but to originate vibrations that ripple into existence with elegance and purpose. The Theosophists saw the spirit as a co-creator, a spark of the infinite playing in the fields of time. To them, the human was never a mere observer. It was the sacred instrument through which divine ideas entered the visible world. What Neville Goddard articulated in modern language, the mystics have always known in silence. Imagination is not fantasy, but prophecy. To feel something before it manifests is not delusion, but spiritual maturity. Every image you hold in your inner world with faith and emotion becomes a seed, and consciousness is the soil. The word, in all traditions, is not mere sound. It is vibration made intention. The Urantia Book speaks of the Urantia soul as a bridge between what is and what can be. It is not static. It is sculpting itself constantly through choice. Every prayer is not a plea, but a blueprint. Every act of presence, an affirmation of trust in the process of becoming. To create consciously is to finally cease blaming the external and begin refining the internal with reverence and precision. As the Hermetic axiom reminds us, as within, so without. If the all is mind, then to master the mind is to become the architect of your field. In this field, your auric resonance, your felt essence, becomes the silent language with which you speak to the quantum heart of the universe. It listens not to your words, but to your alignment, not to your declarations, but to the state from which they arise. Becoming the creator again is not about manifesting desires for egoic satisfaction. It is about embodying such harmony with the divine impulse that even your simplest thoughts are luminous with purpose. In this sacred alignment, miracles are no longer anomalies. They are inevitabilities. The universe does not resist the creator within you. It has been waiting for your return. To become the creator again is not a conquest, but a remembrance. It is not a performance, but a return. You do not need to become divine. You only need to stop pretending you are not. The greatest act of rebellion in a programmed world is not to shout, but to create from love. In a universe that feeds on frequencies, your vibration is your signature, your reality your mirror. The mystics of all ages did not build temples with bricks, but with silence, with inner attunement, with unshakable faith that reality is not dictated by the seen, but by the unseen that precedes it. The ones who walk with grace are not those who never fall, but those who never forget that even the fall can be a canvas. And this is the sacred art, the alchemy of conscious becoming. You align with the divine not by reaching up, but by descending inward into the quiet throne of your own soul. The Urantia soul, as described in the Urantia Book, is not a future reward. It is a living process, an unfolding capacity to integrate spirit into form. Each moment of awareness, each act of loving creation expands its light. It is here, in this sacred laboratory of time and intention, that the divine and human merge, not in abstraction, but in action. To pray is to program. To feel is to design. To intend with clarity is to send ripples into the cosmic web that return, always, as echoes of your own becoming. So we end not with a conclusion, but a threshold. You are never just a fragment of dust wandering through randomness. You were and are a luminous thought of God learning to think again with the same precision, reverence, and power. To become the creator again is not to control reality, but to harmonize with its divine intelligence so purely that even your breath becomes a blessing. Let each word you speak be sacred architecture. Let each thought you cultivate be a luminous seed. Let each act of presence be a pulse that realigns the cosmos. The universe is not waiting for someone else. It is waiting for the awakened architect within you to remember the blueprint. There is a place the clocks cannot find, a space untouched by beginnings or endings. It does not reside in the folds of calendars, nor can it be mapped by stars. It breathes beyond memory, yet within you. It hums in the spaces between thoughts, in the silence between one heartbeat and the next. It is not the future you are moving toward, nor the past that shaped you. It is the always that holds both. This place is not somewhere. It is somewhen, and the soul knows it well. For before you learned to speak, to name, to divide, you were one with it. Before you forgot, you belonged. We call it eternity, but even that word bows before its mystery. It is not an expanse, but a frequency, not a span, but a state. And those who touch it, through stillness, through surrender, through unexplainable love, know that they are not walking toward truth, but reawakening it from within. In this place, the soul does not ascend. It remembers. The light does not strike, it unveils. There is no distance to cross, only veils to lift. And the lifting does not require effort, but trust. The cosmos does not need you to arrive anywhere. It is waiting for you to be completely here. And when you are, when presence overcomes projection, when surrender replaces striving, then you realize the most ancient of truths. There's nothing to find because nothing was ever lost. What we call the path was always a spiral inward. What we feared was the dark was only the depth of unclaimed light. And what we thought was the end is simply the return. What if every longing you've ever felt was not a call to chase something far, but a whisper to turn inward? What if the ache was not lack, but memory? Not a signal of absence, but a distant bell, ringing from the depths of your origin? The soul is not an empty vessel to be filled with knowledge, achievements, or names. The soul is a vast sky, already etched with constellations you have simply forgotten how to see. It remembers beyond words. It remembers the texture of truth before it was filtered through thought. It remembers light before it was broken into the prism of identity. And this remembering is not an intellectual act. It is an unfolding. It happens not in the pursuit of greatness, but in the quiet decision to be still. To listen not with the ears, but with the essence. Because the journey was never linear. It never moved from here to there, from lost to found. It moved in spirals, in echoes, in dreams that mirrored realities unseen. You were never truly asleep, only immersed. And now something stirs, a subtle recognition, a breath that feels ancient, a tear that falls not from sadness, but from sacred recognition. I was always home. All paths led here, to this unplaceable place, to this untimable time, to this moment that holds all moments. You return not to something new, but to the origin you never left. And in this sacred remembering, everything changes. Not because the world alters, but because your seeing does. You no longer ask for signs. You become the sign. You no longer seek the light. You realize you are it. And so, the veil thins not through effort, but through remembrance. You no longer strain to decode the mysteries of existence, for they begin to rise from within you like sunlit mist. The sacred was never hidden, only dimmed by the noise of forgetting. Now, with the mind quiet and the heart open, you walk not toward enlightenment, but as it. You see your reflection in the stars, in the silence between breaths, in the kindness of a stranger. You realize that what you called God was never separate from you. It was the whisper in your chest urging you to come home. Time dissolves. Identity expands. Separation collapses. You become not someone new, but someone original. The primordial echo returns. You are the dreamer and the dreamed. You're the music and the ear that hears it. The creator is no longer a destination, but a presence you carry. Every word, every step, every touch becomes a sacred act of remembrance. Not for glory, not for validation, but for wholeness, for the healing of the human longing to feel again the arms of the infinite around the soul. And now, beloved traveler, we leave the map behind. We step beyond seeking and into being. No longer do we carry questions like burdens, for we have remembered that the answer was never separate from the questioner. The spiral has brought you here to the heart of it all. And as you close your eyes, not to sleep, but to see, you will know without needing proof, without needing time. You are not from here, but you are here to bring the light back. Add if this awakens something in you. Don't let the flame fade. Comment below where in the world you're listening from, because souls are remembering across the planet. Share this with someone you love, someone who forgot they were made of stars. And subscribe to this channel, because every day we bring new videos to nourish the soul. You are not alone. You are never alone. Welcome back.